If you've been listening to the Business of Biotech podcast for a while now, you'll recall that Erin Harris has joined me to co-host a few episodes. Erin's my friend, colleague, and chief editor over at cellandgene.com, and she just recently launched a podcast of her own. It's aptly named Cell and Gene, the podcast. And if you're working in the cell and gene space, you should give it a listen. It's a collection of interviews with the industry and academic leaders moving the space forward. And you can find it at cellandgene.com or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Cell and Gene, the podcast. Check it out. Welcome back to the Business of Biotech. I'm Matt Pillar, and we're shifting gears a little bit today for discussion on genetic medicine with a man who grabbed onto the bleeding edge of the field back in 2010 when he co-founded a company called Precision Nanosystems. Now, this is a bit of a departure for us because Precision Nanosystems isn't developing its own proprietary pipeline of therapeutics. It's more of a platform company for new cell and gene therapeutic development. And my guest today is going to correct me if I'm wrong on that and sort of help paint a little bit more of a picture of what they do. But I'd just say that generally speaking, we wouldn't go out of our way on the Business of Biotech to seek out and secure leaders of translational or platform companies as guests on the show. And that's nothing personal. It's just a function of my mission to focus on the leaders of emerging biopharma companies who are developing pipelines of therapeutics. But the stuff that Precision Nanosystems is working on is new enough that I think it's important enough to warrant a necessary exception. Necessary because there simply aren't enough clinical stage biopharmas with a history of manufacturing, supply, clinical, or otherwise supplies of certain siRNAs and mRNAs and DNAs and CRISPR therapeutics. So to have a discussion about the development and manufacturing challenges and opportunities associated with the modalities that we're just starting to leverage, why not talk with a guy who was working toward that end long before mRNA became sort of a household conversation piece. Dr. James Taylor is our guest today, and he earned his Ph.D. in genetics and bioengineering from the Institute for Systems Biology at the University of British Columbia after studying the physics of electrical engineering as an undergrad. Remind me, Dr. Taylor, to ask you about that combination.
Sure.
Talk. While working toward his Ph.D., he learned the capital markets as a fellow at VC analyst firm Accelerator Corporation. Sort of provides an early hint into his ambitions. From there, it was on to the Center for Drug Research and Development, where he honed some personalized medicine development skills in advance of co-founding Precision Nanosystems. Dr. Taylor, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, and very excited to be here, Matt. Please, James, call me James, and really enjoy the podcast. So it's a pleasure to be a part of it. So thanks for putting this together.
Yeah, I'm glad you enjoy it, and I'm honored to have you. And I may bounce between James and Dr. Taylor. I'd like to reference where it's due. So I want to get some more background on you and sort of the genesis story behind Precision Nanosystems, and we can dovetail into that. What exactly, how you sort of define the company? But I want to start with 2010. Your co-founding of the company. That was early days, as I said, for what we now call advanced therapies, mRNA, RNA, anything, cell and gene. What was the intention back then? 20 going on 22 years ago. I'm sorry, 12
years.
Yeah. 12 years. Yeah.
No, very good. So it was certainly was early days, and we founded the company. I founded it with my co-founding team about a year out of my PhD. And we did this with my co-founders. My key entrepreneurial co-founder is Dr. Ewan Ramsey, who has a PhD postdoc in pharmaceutical sciences, really in genetic medicines on the early days of that, as well as with UBC professors Carl Hansen. And I did much of my PhD with Carl Hansen. We published microfluidics papers together. I did a lot of microfluidics during my PhD, which is part of Precision. Different types of microfluidics, but Carl and I published in that area. Carl's now the CEO of his company, which is Accelera, another fast-growing company in our area here. Mm-hmm. And then Dr. Peter Cullis, and we really came out of his laboratory. And Peter Cullis is a world leader in lipid nanoparticle delivery systems. So really helping to build this field really from the start, 40 plus years ago, and really help to build both the academic and industry sides of this. And through that and through Peter's efforts, Vancouver, Canada is really a hub for lipid nanoparticle delivery systems and RNA delivery and other delivery of other types of drugs. With many companies here, lots of industry in the area, and lots of the approved drugs coming from technologies built in Vancouver. Mm-hmm. So when we were looking to found Precision, it was really focused around solving a key problem in the field, which namely was the ability to create and make these drugs is very difficult. They're very sophisticated medicines. They're comprising hundreds of thousands of molecules that self-assemble into these structures that then are your final drug product. And you can see some of the cartoons of them behind me here. Yeah. But with that, we were really true believers and the concept of genomic medicine. I came out of my Ph.D. at the ISB in Seattle with concepts around systems medicine and systems biology. And so our first funding was a grant focused around sequencing tumors and creating bespoke siRNA delivered drugs towards that. But since that time, and that was, clearly was very early thinking and optimistic that would be possible. But since that time, we've really focused around building the full stack of technology. So, from manufacturing to delivery to the expertise and really, proud of the impact that we've made in the field and working with hundreds of companies to really help to build this field whereby the process is the product. And it's really important to be able to make these drugs, be able to create them. And our goal really is to allow any scientist now to become a genomic medicine developer. And I think that's coming to the fore.
You think that's coming to the fore? So that, and I want to spend some time on what the fore is, right? Like, where are we on sort of the genetic medicine continuum? You've been in the space for quite some time. It's almost an impossible question to answer, because how far does the continuum go, right? So it's difficult to pinpoint where we are right now. Just offer some perspective on how far we've come, and how much further we need to go to reach, I don't know, the point of your choice.
Sure. Yeah. And, my bias is I'm an optimist. And I think you need to be as an entrepreneur.
Sure.
But I would say, and I strongly believe this is that, we're at the very beginning of what will be a major revolution in medicine, potentially the biggest revolution in medicine that we've seen. And I personally believe that genomic medicines will become the largest class of therapeutics. And this is driven by a few, inherent things as part of these types of drugs, and driven by the just inherent genetic nature of biology, driven by how genomic medicines are information-based, essentially digital, driven by the breadth and continued validation of the genomic medicine toolbox. And now with that, and for other factors as well, the democratization of the ability to make these drugs, whereby, every science can be a genomic medicine developer. And so, if you look at, say, regarding our biology, therapeutics have seen great success when they really utilize the same biological processes of our body. And so, genetic medicine does exactly this. The makeup and function of our body is encoded in and regulated by our own genetic materials consisting of RNA and DNA. So delivering RNA and DNA allows us to really treat disease and play on the same playing field as our biology. Also, and very different from traditional therapeutics like small molecules and protein-based drugs that rely on 3D structure to have their effect and interact with the target, genomic medicines really are sequence-based. So they really are information or digital-based. And so I believe, similar to what we saw when computation went from analog to digital, medicine now has the opportunity to do the same. And what this means is that drugs are now designed, not discovered, these types of drugs, whereby you can go from target to drug candidate in the matter of days. You don't need to hire your army of med chemists to create a molecule that may or may not do what you want it to do to the given target. And then, as you mentioned at the start, there's siRNA, there's mRNA, there's gene editing technologies. We have a very diverse and increasingly validated genomic medicine toolbox. So we really now can do anything we want to a given gene and affect it in whatever way is needed to cure disease. We can turn off a mutated gene that's causing a rare disease, a protein that's a bad actor. We can turn that off, and there's marketed drugs now that do that. You can use mRNA to express proteins that are missing, or in the case of vaccines, encode proteins that would teach the immune system of a given pathogen. And then with gene editing technologies, we can for the first time, sequence specifically go in and fix problems directly in a patient's genome, which is just absolutely remarkable.
Yeah.
And it's just a wonderful time. And we're really, I think philosophically, I'm very excited about the democratization of the field. And because of this information nature, the digital nature, plus, activities of our companies and others, and, the field itself, it's pretty easy to get started making these drugs as compared to what it has been in the past. And so if you're a biologist and you understand some new understanding of disease, you can, in a matter of a week, create a candidate drug product that can potentially affect that, with some caveats on, where the technology works best and so on. But it's really remarkable and extremely exciting. I think it'll be hugely beneficial for society.
Yeah, for sure. So you put a lot on the table there, Dr. Taylor. There's a lot of follow-up questions.
Yeah.
I need to figure out where to start. So first of all, genomic medicine and your commentary around, it's a bold statement to say you think it's going to be the largest, whatever words you want to use, share of market in
Yep.
biologic therapeutics, whatever you want to call it. It's a big statement. Underneath that genomic medicine umbrella, what do you have a hard stop anywhere where you say like this, and this count, this does not, as quote unquote genomic medicine? Because you mentioned a few: genomic editing. I mean,
yep.
Gene therapy. And then of course there are other modalities, perhaps even small molecules, that somehow affect or influence, right, diseases that are related to genetic medicine. I'm just curious if you have sort of a
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know.
Fast rules, right?
Yeah. I don't know if I do, but it's. I think we could say maybe if we needed to really put a border around it, using sequence specific modulation of a target. So that would be RNA. Obviously, the silencing, expressing, gene editing now, sequence specific. I think, but you're right. The scope creep gets a little gray when you start thinking about, there's other really interesting technologies that will be enabled by this as well. Like, there's companies involved in non-coding RNA that use their secondary structure to affect the target per se, or other epigenetic regulators and so on. But it's a big field. There's a lot of things that are possible. You can deliver an mRNA to express a monoclonal antibody. There's just a tremendous amount of creativity that I think that is being unlocked in the scientific community that we just couldn't access before. But these technologies are really enabling that.
Yeah. And some of the beginning of the conversation, we were kind of talking about how far we've come, and your point around democratization of availability, right? Access to genetic medicine is sort of, it underscores just how far things have come in such a short period of time. Obviously this was an extremely expensive thing to even think about, 10, even 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. Where does that democratization start, though? Because there are certainly, gene therapy certainly is still not it's not a standard of care cheap date, if you will. Where does that democratization start? Where do we see it happening now, and where is it going from there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't pretend to be an expert in, say, viral-based gene therapies. When people use the term gene therapy, often they're implying like a viral delivery for a permanent or a somewhat permanent expression of a protein. In terms of the technologies we involve with nanoparticle RNA-based systems, mm-hmm. We, for instance, not to dwell too much on our company per se, but we have a benchtop manufacturing instrument and benchtop lipid nanoparticle kits, and you can order RNA from another supplier. And in a couple days, we could have you making on essentially on your desk there a candidate vaccine that would look very much like the approved vaccines now in the RNA space. Right. So with that, the democratization I think is very deep, whereby you don't need that pharmaceutical expertise. You can have work within the industry to have that, and so we love working with the academics that are have some new understanding of biology or some new maybe it's a new gene editing flavor or what have you, right? And then can work with them very quickly to get going. But I think as we move to the future, similar to how DNA sequencers got to the point where they enabled everyone to sequence everything, it's the same. It's the other side of the coin, where now with genomic medicines, we can get everyone to, instead of measure and create diagnostics, to perturb biology and to create therapeutics, which I think is going to be tremendous.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess in retrospect, right, looking back on the question I just asked around where the democratization starts is probably a dumb question, because anyone listening to this episode would probably think to themselves, well, duh, the COVID vaccine, right? I mean, if that's not democratization of a technology, I don't know what is. Federally funded vaccination for everyone in the world. But let's talk about that specifically for a minute. What's been the impact? I mean, obviously, there's, as I said, it's mRNA is a household term now. Whether people understand it or not, they say it, right? In relation to the COVID vaccine. But what's that done for the field?
Yeah, great. And I would say it's interesting, right? Because you have insiders like myself, scientists, entrepreneurs, investors that have been believers for a long period of time, and even the companies that have made the big impact, the Moderna, BioNTech, they didn't come from out of nowhere, right? They had big programs, lots of work in cancer vaccines or other infectious disease vaccines. So, and a lot of investors supporting that. So there's a lot of folks that have been believers. But I think for us anyways, speak for myself, it really validated, what we were hoping would be possible. And then for everyone else, it just put a huge spotlight on what's possible and has created, a lot more stakeholders and a lot more interest in the field for good reasons. And the mRNA vaccines, this would be remarkable if a single mRNA vaccine came out of it as a Me Too or something, or a follow-on. But what we saw was that these vaccines won the vaccine race in almost every category. So speed, efficacy, limited side effects, ability now to respond to variants. So it really just shows that this is truly a disruptive technology that's eclipsed the competition and bodes well for the future in terms of what could be possible. Really highlighted the differentiating factors. And I think as we move forward, other factors like manufacturability, ability to do local manufacturing and country manufacturing, all these different concepts that now can be possible with these technologies are going to further disrupt and enable the field in very, very positive ways.
The Business of Biotech is brought to you in partnership with Cytiva. Together, we're committed to helping the leaders of new and emerging biopharma companies navigate the financial, organizational, human resources, and regulatory waters you'll encounter on your way from discovery to the clinic and beyond. Check out a host of useful resources for biotech leaders at Cytiva's Emerging Biotech Accelerator at cytivalifesciences.com/emerging biotech. That's CYTIVA lifesciences.com/emerging biotech. I've heard just anecdotally, had conversations with folks in the space who kind of see the forward-facing continuum for mRNA technology as a vaccine or therapeutic candidate, going kind of from COVID, obviously, to influenza, other related respiratory diseases, but beyond viral diseases. There seems to be I don't know if I'd call it consensus, but just anecdotally, some agreement that oncology is a space that could benefit from quote unquote mRNA vaccine technology. Um, and it raises a question in my mind around who is, and you're, you've got an interesting perspective on this, on the response to this question. The question is like, who is getting in the game now beyond the folks who are the myriad folks who are working on, COVID and SARS and respiratory, viral vaccine candidates using mRNA. Are they traditional kind of therapeutics companies who are, have monoclonal antibodies or other, traditional vaccine technologies who are now going, okay, like we need to get on this game? Or is it a whole new class from an emerging biotech standpoint? Is it a whole new class of companies who are kind of starting from day one with mRNA?
Yeah, I think we're seeing, all comers. I would say from large pharma they've been in the space kind of as small teams of innovating within large pharma. We've seen that some really innovative groups, but I would say that now a lot of them are coming more fulsome, and you're seeing some of the M&A activity around that as well. But in terms of emerging companies, we're seeing a lot of emerging companies come to the fore. Whereby, I guess in two types of ways. One way, having a new RNA platform of some sort or another, some twist on something being developed, and then having now the access to the delivery technologies that enable those RNA platforms. They can move very quickly and can be very smart in choosing targets and tissues and so on to prove out their own technologies in very interesting ways. And then secondly, I would say you have an opportunity where, again, it's a very accessible technology comparatively, whereby, once you understand something about disease, that in itself is that to me, that should be the hard part. Creating the drug that goes and perturbs that disease should be the much easier part. It's not there yet, but I think now we're seeing those companies or those groups and people just wanting to solve disease problems, and they can use this technology as another, really important arrow in their quiver. But really, it's you can get going and testing hypotheses, testing disease, directly by affecting the gene that you're going after.
Yeah. You've mentioned a couple of times the accessibility of the technology, and I think it's agreed. But I think where I'm hearing, the challenge that lies ahead is beyond sort of that discovery and experimentation phase. And now we're looking at okay, we've got a potential therapeutic candidate. How do we build? How do we manufacture it? If we get to the point where we're needing phase 2 clinical volumes scale, how do we possibly do that when we're not necessarily purpose built to do it? And I don't know what that looks like. I'm asking, I'm not sure if you do either from a manufacturing perspective, but I'm curious about your take on that. Like, are folks just trying to go, horns down into the mRNA space using like viral vector manufacturing technology, or are they, kind of putting things together, cobbling things together to make mRNA work? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I would say, so in terms of if you're the drug developer, you have companies like ours and others that you can work with sort of an outsourced model to help with your manufacturing. Mm-hmm. So you can go the distance, through pretty far through your clinical trials by leveraging technologies like ours, companies like ours, and so on to do that. So you can really carry the ball with that, and it's I think that's a pretty normal model across a lot of therapeutics right now. Yep. In regards to how these drugs are made compared to other biologics, so the manufacturing processes for nanoparticle RNA-based drugs is quite different than for, say, a protein or even a viral-based gene therapy, whereby the traditional biologics for, say, like proteins and viral-based gene therapies are using cells as factories. Right. So they have cell tanks to produce the protein, and then there's purification steps and so on. I'm no expert in those processes, but what we do with RNA and nanoparticles, it's a process based on physics. So you're basically in a continuous flow format, getting a nanoprecipitation reaction to work, where you have molecules in solution and you're bringing those together to create the final drug product. But there's no cells involved when you're making the drug product. So it's in essence, it's a simpler process. You can then, I think in the future, it'll be very interesting to see, the ability to stand up manufacturing facilities much easier, faster, smaller footprint. Go to concepts from the current centralized manufacturing paradigm of the pharmaceutical industry to more distributed manufacturing paradigms, and do this. There's challenges, and I would say hard but tractable challenges that are needed to overcome to get there. But it certainly is where the field, I would say, is pointing.
Yeah. What do you? So that's another big stack. Distributed models. We're talking about some pretty significant paradigm shifts. What do you see as? I mean, and again, I recognize and I appreciate the fact that you told me from the outset that you're an optimist.
Yeah.
And so am I. Right? If you work in the life sciences and you're not optimistic, you probably need to find a new job.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that. But where if you put your sort of not your pessimist hat, but your objective hat on, what challenges lie between now and that distributed model where, we can, I want to talk about regulatory as well, but that distributed model where regulatory issues have been addressed, manufacturing issues are ironed out. We've got efficacious therapies, again, democratized.
Mm-hmm.
What do you see as the big challenges? Like, what are our next steps next hurdles that we need to overcome?
Yeah. For manufacturing.
Yeah. Right.
No, it's a great question. And, so, as I said, so the processes are different. Some of the technologies, for instance, technologies that we develop are fit for purpose, really only designed with this type of drug in mind. Mm-hmm. Some of the other technologies utilized have been repurposed from, say, protein therapeutics, be it the filtration technologies and so on that are involved in bioprocessing. I think where we need to go, and what I'm very keen to be involved in, is to create really a fit for purpose end-to-end clinical manufacturing platform that allows us to go from raw materials to final drug, right? And then once we do that, I think you can, really set that up in a systematic way. The future of manufacturing with, be it automation or really create a system where you can replicate that in a very reproducible way across geographies is very possible and doable with these technologies, I believe. There's a lot of engineering that needs to happen between here and there, but I think that's where we really need to go as an industry, and treat this therapeutic class, with this, the same level of conviction that we have around that this is going to be a big, important therapeutic class, and there's problems that specifically need to be solved. And so, for example, we work with companies that are making one drug per patient in sort of the cancer arena, right? And personalized cancer vaccines and other areas. To then in the other spectrum, you have the COVID vaccines that are trying to get into, everyone in the world. And there's drugs that fit that full spectrum. And so you need to solve problems, pretty unique problems across those different spectrums. But they're all very worthwhile to solve appropriately.
Yeah. Yeah. Where do you see the next big, you and I both mentioned oncology. Is that the next big therapeutic area for this technology, or do you think there are other avenues of pick?
Yeah, in genomic medicine, what we see in areas, the big indications I think people are gravitating to at this point in time. It's in every indication, I would say. People are working on, again, very creative. The field's doing very innovative stuff, working at every indication. But we see a lot in infectious disease through the vaccine platforms. Now you have RNA, lipid nanoparticles, data in patients across such a large number of patients, which is really useful for those platforms. But then, like you said, getting into flu, getting into other areas, even companies are even doing very hard problems like malaria and HIV. We'll see how that works on more challenging targets in that way. Cancer, personalized cancer vaccines, neoantigen approaches would be a key area that the vaccine platforms can readily move over. And I think then the question becomes, does the biology of cancer vaccines, when we can really figure to get that to work really well. But then there's other applications. I think rare disease is a big spot where rare diseases are driven by changes in single genes, 80% of the cases. So being able to either turn that given gene off or on can have a huge impact. And the siRNA field has really cut their teeth in the rare disease space, I would say. And then other things like expression of functional proteins. So you can express, the gene editing technologies. They rely on, in certain cases, mRNA to deliver the encoded endonucleases, the Cas9s and other variants of that. There's companies that are secreting cytokines, delivering expression of mRNA to express cytokines. So secreted proteins are the antibody example I gave. And then just other sort of kind of out there ideas that are really interesting, like delivery of RNA that express epigenetic regulators, tRNA, long non-coding RNA. So a lot of really interesting things. And I think, that's a long list, obviously, somewhat rank ordered, I suppose, but hopefully that's helpful.
Sure. No, that absolutely. I just heard oRNA the other day.
There's a new one every day.
There's a new one every day. I was just like, I'm thinking like, what letter do I want to tack on? Do you, when you look at those opportunities, those therapeutic opportunities, are you seeing the potential of the technology to address specific indications driving those matches, or is it more the markets driving those matches? And I know it's a balance. This is the business of biotech. We recognize that there's a balance between these two things, but I'm just curious about your take on that. Is it a market kind of patient need driven growth initiative? Is that what's driving growth, or is it more this technology is particularly well suited to address these specific classes of disease?
Yeah, sure. And COVID aside, where society had to throw everything it got at solving that problem. Yeah. I would say, there's definitely pull from both sides. I think a lot of companies will take an approach if you're a new gene editing technology or you have a new oRNA, what have you. Going after where you have the best chance of success is a smart approach, and everyone's going after diseases of high medical need, right? So you solve a problem that's important to patients. But then having a technology-focused approach to get validation of your platform. So you're trying to avoid stacking technology risk on these new platforms, I think, is a smart approach. And then you can, from there, expand out into other applications. And some of the leaders in the field have been very successsul in that.
Yeah. Okay. I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about the regulatory scene, because that influences everything. What's your take on where we are from a regulatory perspective now? The obvious place to start is, emergency use authorization, moving right on through, right? But that's not gonna be the case with the next mRNA vaccine. So where's the agency from your perspective, and where should biopharmas who are working on these therapies be in terms of their relationships or approach to the agency?
Oh yeah, I think working closely with the agency is important, and I think that was the efforts put by the agency and the companies and governments with COVID was I thought was a really positive example of everyone working hand in hand to solve that big problem, and to take a good balance of caution as well as getting solutions to people. I think as these new emerging therapeutics happen, there needs to be a close knit relationship of education and really hearing the needs from the agency and fitting those in. Mm-hmm. I would say, where we are at today from a technology perspective, we have increasing clinical validation of various platforms. Clearly, vaccines got a lot of validation. I think as we look to the next one and looking at systemic delivery, different dosages, we'll have to, I think as we go through those clinical trials and see the data, hopefully it comes out clean. Often there's setbacks in this industry. Nothing's as linear as everyone would love. But I think again, the technology will continue to get improved and push forward to enable different types of indications to be enabled. And these are very platform technologies. So if you get one drug through and it goes well, it really bodes well, I think, for the second and third and fourth and next drugs that use similar mechanisms, but maybe target a different gene.
Yeah. You mentioned the simplicity of the production and manufacturing approach, especially as it relates to perhaps, some current biologic processes. How do you think that plays out from an internal manufacturing versus outsourced, CDMO, CMO relationship moving forward? We see it playing out in cell and gene right now where, there's this handful of companies who are developing cell and gene therapies who say, like, what we're doing is so intense, so complex, and so proprietary. There's no way I would outsource it to my mom if she were if she were a leader in her space. And then a whole bunch of other folks in the exact same space going like, this is so complex and expensive to do. There's no way we wouldn't outsource it, right? We can't build our own manufacturing facilities. I'm asking you to kind of look quite a ways into the future right now, but what do you see playing out, 5, 6, 10 years down the road in terms of manufacturing capacity for genomic medicine? And will it be insourced or outsourced?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if I have a good answer on this one. I think it's I think that you could argue both ways. Like we'll continue to see the outsourcing of the clinical manufacturing. At the same time, I think due to the simplicity, it might encourage people to bring in-house. Potentially standing these up will be less onerous. I think a lot of that has to be proven out though over the next 5 or so years as people make those, as the pharma companies make those decisions and do the calculus on what makes the most sense for them.
Okay.
But it's a really interesting question and something that we're thinking a lot about right now as well. Sure.
Yeah. I'm sure it influences your business decision making. Go forward. So we're running a bit short on time here, James, but I want to make sure we have some time to talk about what's next for Precision Nanosystems. I don't know, and if you want to share some of the latest tech advances there or business advances.
Sure. Yeah. So we, as I think I said at the start, we're really focused around building the full stack of technologies to make these types of therapeutics. And what we really aim to do is to really help drug companies to take a lot of the risk off of actually making and producing these types of drugs. And so that includes for us our nano assembler manufacturing platform around Nanoparticle genetic medicines, our Genvoy lipid nanoparticle based RNA delivery platform, as well as providing our deep expertise. So is how we like to operate and really support our partners as much as possible. And so in terms of what's going on, we're continuing to innovate in all aspects of these platforms, particularly in the clinical side of the area. We're working with hundreds of companies in the area with this really across all indications. Recently and started to enter in a very meaningful way into cell therapy, using these technologies to help to do interesting things and ex vivo type approaches. And then, as you know, we're recently acquired by the Danaher Life Science platform, who has the industry leading technology that's very complementary to ours across the full process. So we're really excited about combining efforts and really creating that end-to-end fit for purpose ideal solution that's really going to help the industry accelerate its development and get more of these medicines through the clinic and to patients.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's timely. I think fit for purpose is when I referenced earlier that I talked to a lot of companies who are kind of like trying to make do with what they have and figure out how to work. Fit for purpose is what's seemingly missing right now. So it's important work that's going on over there.
Very great.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the time, Dr. Taylor. It's a pleasure talking with you, and I hope to have you back on the show sometime. But I appreciate the insight and kind of glimpse into what's going on in this space. Like I said, it's very, very few have the perspective that you do. So it's important to share.
Well, likewise. Thank you so much. I enjoyed it, and I look forward to this and future podcasts as well. Excellent.
So that's Precision Nanosystems, Dr. James Taylor. I'm Matt Pillar, and this is the Business of Biotech. We are produced by Bioprocess Online in partnership with Cytiva. Please visit cytivalifesciences.com/emerging biotech to explore a trove of custom curated content designed to help guide the emerging biopharma's journey. Then go sign up for my newsletter at bioprocessonline.com. And if you like what you heard here today, subscribe to the pod, give us 5 stars. And as always, thanks for listening.